my top 5 Resident Evil games. You can call it that or anything else you want, but I'm going to call it the Resident Evil series Ranked Part 2. Kicking us off at number 5. Oh ho ho, we got a good one. Resident Evil 4. Now, what can I say about this game that hasn't been said since the beginning of time? I completely get it. I understand why everybody thinks of this game as their personal favorite whenever they think of the Resident Evil series. I understand why it is the instant classic that it is, and why it was the pivotal turning point for the entire series. I get it. The game's awesome. It's not as action-y as I expected it to be, I guess. Is it faster paced than the originals? Absolutely. Is it more action orientated than survival horror like the originals are? Definitely. But I still found myself needing to conserve as much ammo as I could, which ended up paying off in the long run later in the game. Specifically, the part with the druids or whatever they are, and the castle where you have to protect Ashley from the what feels like an endless onslaught of bad guys that literally mowed through every bullet I had. Now, if you are, good at the game or familiar with the game, you probably have no issue with the part that I'm talking about, especially now, all these years later. But I definitely did. And after I finally beat it, after God knows how long, my mom and I actually did some research, and we found out that not only is the part that I'm talking about the hardest part of Resident Evil 4, but also in some circles within the Resident Evil community, it is one of the hardest parts of the entire series, which just kind of justified my rage and frustration that I was feeling. I wasn't quite as up there, my levels weren't quite as in the red as they were with Resident Evil 5, but they were pretty close. So it justified those feelings, as well as made me feel really, really good that I quite possibly beat one of the hardest points in the entire series. So, yay me. I should also mention that I was playing, when I played Resident Evil for the first time, I played on the original GameCube. I skipped over all the remasters and remakes and stuff that have come out since then, and just stuck to the original version, or one of them. And the game still holds up, even in 2020. It feels good still, it looks good still, and is a lot of fun to play. So that's Resident Evil 4. Coming in at number 4, we have Revelations. Now, I guess the question here would be, what is it that I prefer about the original Revelations over the sequel? And I don't know, there's just something about it, I guess. Maybe the best way to put it is just the way it's written and delivered to me. I don't know. one of the things that stand out to me is the fact that it's delivered. Well, two things. One, it's delivered as an episodic TV show. And two is that it jumps around different characters and kind of explains the whole story from different points of view at the same time. Which is which also happens in the second game. Admittedly, pretty much everything I like about the first game, the second game also has. I guess it just does so differently. Maybe it has to do with the plot in general. The setting, with it being on a seemingly abandoned cruise ship rather than an island. Maybe it has something to do with the concept of, the bad guy wants to infect the entire ocean with the virus, and then the virus will make its way on land and kind of go through the entire world, rather than just seemingly being test subjects on the island that the second one is. And I don't know, something about the plot and everything just it grabbed me, and it wouldn't let go. Those cliffhangers at the end of each episode before it would say previously on Resident Evil Revelations, like those had me going, oh my god, I gotta play more. I gotta see how this person or that person gets out of these situations. And I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time, and that's why I loved it. And for whatever reason, Revelations 2 just didn't hit me the same way. It didn't grab me the same way. It didn't affect me the same way. Still good. Still had everything about it, about the first one that I liked. It's just, I don't know, the plot was a little bit different. Maybe the way it was written was a little bit different, but I didn't feel the sense of urgency and the sense of like, oh my, what's going to happen next, that I did in the first one, which is why the first one is where it is and the second one is where it is. But, if you happen to like the second one more than the first one or whatever, share your opinions. I'd love to know why, and love to get a deeper understanding of that. Maybe there's something I missed. Maybe there's something about the second one that I just don't appreciate. But yeah, let me know. So breaking the top 3, if I remember right, it's going to be quite an unpopular opinion. Oh yeah, yeah, a disgustingly unpopular opinion, because number 3 is Resident Evil 6. Now I know that this game is widely regarded for basically being a dumpster fire. What I gather, rather than being a traditional survival horror game, just like Resident Evil is known for, it turns up the action to 11 and is filled with, gunfights and explosions and, performing wrestling moves on zombies and just kind of over-the-top ridiculousness. Which is why literally nobody in the Resident Evil world seems to like this game or even acknowledge its existence. And then there's me, who would say that literally everything that everybody else hated about this game is why I loved it. I really, really enjoyed the fact that I couldn't put the controller down. I didn't feel safe putting the controller down at any moment, because there was constantly creatures flying at me and explosions and needing to run away from things, and on and on and on and on. It was just constant, like adrenaline and high octane, and just the whole time. And that's why I loved it. And while I respect those opinions of the Resident Evil aficionados that hate this game, I am going to say something probably a little bit more controversial than it being so high on my list to begin with, is that why do you hate this game for being what it is and not Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 7 for that matter, which we will get to here in a little bit, because in my mind, in my small, insignificant, pea-sized brain, Resident Evil 6 does exactly what Resident Evil 4 does for it, or did for the series back in the day. It changes it. It makes it different. Now, if you were to say, well, the plot's stupid, or something about something along those lines, like you just don't like the plot, you don't like the structure of it, you don't like character models, whatever, then fine. But to say you don't like Resident Evil 6 because it's not a Resident Evil game, or it does something different, it reinvents itself, is kind of hypocritical if you like Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 4 more specifically, because in my mind, like I said, it's just doing the exact same thing. Maybe poorer, but it's reinventing its own wheel. So if you like one but not the other, for any other, for the sole reason of I don't like it because it's different than Resident Evil, that's kind of hypocritical to me. I will grant you one thing. Maybe the reason why I loved this experience so much in Resident Evil 6 is because when you play when I played the original, the entire series, back to back, front to back, one right after another, this game felt like a bright spot because it was so different. Because it wasn't the slow, excuse me, slow-paced, high dread survival game. It was pretty much Resident Evil 4 on crack. And maybe that's why I loved it so much, is because up to that point there was a certain pattern. You had 1 through Code Veronica, which were a certain way. You had 4 and 5, which are a certain way. And then there's 6, which is, an action movie rather than scary. It's basically what the Resident Evil movies are. Than their traditional horror counterparts. And maybe that's why I liked it so much. But if I was to say, just randomly, sit down after this video and play through 6 again, I probably wouldn't like it as much. I wouldn't be as excited to play through 5 different angles of the same campaign again. That's kind of monotonous after a while, kind of tedious, The story was cool and everything, but after about the fourth or fifth time playing through the same events from just a different viewpoint. Same bosses and everything for the most part. It did get kind of tiresome. I will grant you that. So I think if I was just to, spin a wheel, close my eyes, spin a wheel, and it landed on Resident Evil 6 for me to pick up and play just by itself, probably wouldn't like it as much. But when you play the series as a whole, I found it very, very refreshing. But just like with any other game, let's talk about it. Let's share our feelings and opinions on it. I would really like to sit down and have a discussion with somebody who genuinely is one of those people that hates this game and doesn't acknowledge their existence, because I really didn't think it was that bad. I mean, it's probably not good, but it's definitely not that bad. But for now, let's move away from there and go to number 2, no pun intended, is Resident Evil 2, the remake. And what is not to like about this game? Everything about it is so good. It looks good. It feels good. It's a lot of fun. But I guess one of the really, really high points that I gotta give it is just how hard it works to create this terrifying atmosphere. From the majority of the levels being kind of dark and grimy to having zombies after you, having lickers after you, having Tyrant constantly on your heels. It just creates this tension and they're each their own significant piece of an overall feel of the game, the atmosphere of the game, that captures you. And now all of a sudden you are not sitting on the couch holding a controller. You are Leon. You are Claire. You are trying to survive. You are trying to outrun everything in that police station or wherever you are in the game that wants to kill you. And it is not only a very, very well done Resident Evil game. It is a very, very good horror game, in my opinion, in general. I do have to say that it has probably one of the, maybe any other person is going to see this as insignificant, but it has, as far as me and my mom goes, probably one of the most terrifying segments of any horror game, any movie, anything that we've ever experienced. And that is the part when you are playing as Sherry Birkin and you're in the orphanage, hiding from the chief or whatever it is, or whoever he is. I think what makes that horror moment stand out above anything else, as stupid as it sounds, is it is very real. It is much more plausible to be around a extremely abusive adult as a kid than it is to be around zombies or mutants. And I think my mom and I both kind of connected with that. We felt that. We felt the genuine terror that this little girl had trying to stay away from this very, very bad man. and the idea of what he was going to do to her if he caught her. That was very, very stressful and very, very impactful. And I can honestly say I hated that part the most, just because of, like, emotionally how it connected to me and how real it felt. Just the genuine terror that went on in a pretty much pretty much, I don't want to say insignificant part of the game, but a much smaller level, a much more conveniently packaged portion of the game compared to the larger picture. But that is definitely a horror moment that I will never forget. And just the fact that it was so much fun to play. There's so much to do. We had no problem going from Leon's campaign, jumping straight into Claire's, to play more, to get the whole story. And I just think each element that would make it great on its own come together to dance with each other and make, like I said, not only a really great retelling of a Resident Evil game, but a great horror game in general. If you were looking for a horror game to play, I would definitely recommend one of the first would be Resident Evil 2. So that only leaves one left. And if you're familiar with the series and or good at math, you know the one game that I have not mentioned yet, which is Resident Evil 7. Again, like I mentioned earlier, a complete renovation to the Resident Evil series, a reinvention of the Resident Evil series. And that is why I love this game as much as I do. Because to the naked eye, it doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game. I've mentioned this a few times, but when you play the entire series back to back, one right after another in succession, there is a rhythm that you get into where it's like, zombies are going to be a problem. Some sort of mutated monster is going to be involved, and it's pretty much always due to Umbrella's mistakes or somebody connected to Umbrella. All the games kind of play, the plots kind of play out the same way. Here, it's in a different package. It's first person. It's, does it have something to do with Umbrella? Yes. Does it deal with a BOW? Yes. But unlike the other entries in the series, it doesn't ram it down your throat. It literally doesn't mention it until a certain point in the game. It doesn't kind of... I spent the entire game looking for those connections, waiting for that connection to happen. And it doesn't until the game wants it to, which feels really, really good. Because, it doesn't present you with zombies. It doesn't mention Umbrella until pretty much the end of the game when you start to piece everything together. So basically, you go into this disgusting house in the backwoods of Louisiana and fight a family of freaks. Are they mutants? Yes. But lots of horror games and lots of horror movies have mutants and monsters. And, I can't stress enough how great it felt for it not to feel like a Resident Evil game. If it wasn't for the BOW and Umbrella stuff at the end of the game, if you just handed me a controller and said, "What do you think you're playing?" I probably would have said an Outlast game or something. It's something completely different than Resident Evil. Um, and it was so refreshing to revitalize that horror experience and let you, you know, focus on the family in such a way that you're like, it's connected, yes, but focus on this before you get here. And then, so by the time that you discover how it ties into Umbrella and how it ties into their experiments and whatever, I thought it was really well done. I wasn't mad at all. I was like, alright, that was a pretty decent game. And again, I just love the fact that it was a horror experience that didn't feel like Resident Evil. Nothing about it really felt like Resident Evil. It felt, like I said, something closer to like an Outlast or something in that vein. And, when you play the entire series like I did, it hits you like a brick wall. Like, I couldn't believe that I was playing a Resident Evil game. And the way that they kind of sneak in that connection to make it a Resident Evil game is pretty good. And, I mean, yeah. I don't know what else there is to say other than I hope going forward Resident Evil Village and any other Resident Evil game kind of pick up where 7 left off as far as the feel and kind of the atmosphere and because I am kind of getting tired of zombies and stuff. It's fine if you want to have it deal with viruses and BOWs and stuff, but like, come on, the zombie apocalypse is kind of old. So yeah, give me a village full of freaks, man. I'm all about it. But yeah, that's why Resident Evil 7 is my mom and I's favorite Resident Evil game. And I actually came across somebody recently in passing that is the only person I've ever heard them say that they liked nothing about Resident Evil. They liked it more than Resident Evil 6, but Resident Evil 7, they didn't like anything about it, which I think is absolutely insane, because if you are a fan of the series, you should appreciate what they did here. And if you are a fan of the horror genre, in any stretch of the imagination, you will love how they told the story here and just all the elements that went into it. So that'll about wrap it up, guys. That is the entire timeline of the Resident Evil games ranked from my least favorite experience to my all-time favorite experience. And I'll just say in closing that my mom and I are very, very excited for Resident Evil Village, which I know the majority of you are as well. So I am very excited to play it and bring you guys a review or whatever form that comes to the channel. And we'll just keep Resident Evil going. I definitely feel as though it is a landmark series, and I feel very, very terrible that I waited this long to play it, because I feel like I missed out, and it definitely is one of my favorites. So, until next time, guys, until the next series, see you next time.